I never believed that a single moment could alter the course of a life, until the rain came and washed away everything I thought I knew about my place in this world. They say fate is written in the stars, but mine was written in the mud of a London street, beneath a torn umbrella, and the unconscious body of a man I did not yet know would become my undoing. The autumn of 1847 had been merciless in its gray persistence, and that particular afternoon was no exception. I had just finished delivering a gown to Lady Pemberton on Cavendish Square, my fingers still aching from the hours of needlework that had kept me awake through the previous night. The silk had been French, impossibly delicate, and Lady Pemberton had not even glanced at my face when she handed the coin to her footman to pass to me. I was invisible to women like her, a pair of hands that produced beautiful things, but possessed no beauty worth acknowledging. I pulled my shawl tighter against the wind as I made my way toward the omnibus stop, my boots already soaked through from the puddles that had claimed the streets. The rain fell in sheets now, angry and relentless, and I cursed myself for not bringing a sturdier umbrella. The one I carried had belonged to my mother, its fabric worn thin in places, its handle smooth from decades of use. It was a foolish thing to carry, more sentiment than shelter, but I could not bring myself to replace it. The sound came first, a terrible crack of wood and the screaming of horses. I turned just in time to see the carriage, a magnificent black affair with gilded edges, lurch violently as its wheels struck something in the road. Time seemed to slow as the vehicle tilted, then toppled entirely onto its side, sliding through the mud with a sound that would haunt my dreams for months to come. The horses thrashed in their harnesses, their cries piercing through the rain, and people on the streets scattered in every direction. But I did not scatter. I cannot explain what possessed me in that moment, what force moved my feet toward danger when every instinct should have driven me away. Perhaps it was the sight of the carriage door hanging open, the glimpse of a man's body lying motionless, half inside and half out of the ruined vehicle. Perhaps it was simply that I had spent so many years being invisible that I had forgotten to be afraid. I ran. My boots slipped in the mud, and I nearly fell twice, but I ran until I reached him. He was tall, his dark hair matted with rain and blood from a wound at his temple. His coat was fine, the fabric worth more than I earned in a year, and his face, even in unconsciousness, held a severity that made my breath catch. He was not handsome in the soft way of poets or the cheerful way of country gentlemen. His was a face carved from stone, all sharp angles and shadows, the face of a man who had never learned to be gentle. The rain was pouring directly onto him, and without thinking I knelt beside him and raised my mother's umbrella, holding it over his head to shield him from the worst of it. My skirts were ruined, soaked through with mud and water, but I did not care. I pressed my fingers to his throat and felt his pulse, steady but faint, and relief flooded through me. "Help!" I cried out, my voice barely audible above the storm. "Someone please help!" People had gathered at a distance, but none approached. I saw their faces, pale and uncertain, and I understood. A overturned carriage belonging to someone wealthy meant complications. Questions from magistrates, potential blame. It was safer to watch from afar, to let someone else bear the burden of involvement. "Please," I called again, desperation cracking my voice. "He is alive, but he needs a physician." A groan escaped the man's lips, and his eyes fluttered open. They were gray, the color of winter storms, and for a moment they fixed on my face with an intensity that stole the breath from my lungs. He tried to speak, but managed only a sound of pain, his hand moving instinctively toward his head. "Do not move," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You have been injured. Help is coming." I did not know if this was true, but I needed it to be. I needed to believe that someone in this city of thousands would show enough decency to assist a dying man. The blood from his wound was mixing with the rain, trailing down his temple in rivulets of pink, and I used the corner of my shawl to press against the gash, trying to slow the bleeding. "Who?" he whispered, his gray eyes never leaving my face. "Who are you?" "No one," I answered honestly. "No one of consequence." His lips curved into something that might have been a smile had he possessed the strength for it. Then his eyes closed again, and for a terrible moment I thought I had lost him. The next minutes blurred together in my memory. A man finally emerged from the crowd, a physician who had been walking home from his practice and whose conscience had finally overcome his caution. Together we managed to move the injured man away from the wreckage, and the physician examined him while I continued to hold the umbrella, my arms aching from the effort. The coachman had survived as well, though his leg was badly broken, and soon others came forward to help him. It was only when another carriage arrived, this one bearing a crest I did not recognize, that I learned the identity of the man whose blood now stained my shawl. "Your Grace," a frantic voice called out, and I watched as servants in immaculate livery rushed toward us. "Your Grace, we came as quickly as we could. Your Grace." The words echoed in my mind, rearranging everything I thought I understood about this moment. I had heard of dukes, of course. I had sewn gowns for their wives and daughters, had glimpsed their carriages passing through streets that my feet wore thin from walking. But I had never touched one, never knelt beside one in the mud, never held an umbrella over one while his blood soaked into my clothing. The servants lifted him carefully, carrying him toward the waiting carriage, and I remained kneeling in the mud, suddenly aware of how I must look. A drowned creature, covered in filth, clutching a broken umbrella like a madwoman. I tried to rise, but my legs had gone numb, and I stumbled, catching myself on my hands. A gloved hand appeared before my face. I looked up to find one of the servants, an older man with kind eyes, offering to help me stand. "Miss," he said, his voice gentle, "His Grace would want us to see you safely home. You saved his life." I took his hand and allowed him to pull me to my feet. "I did not save anyone," I said. "I only held an umbrella." The servant smiled, a sad and knowing expression. "Sometimes, miss, that is enough." They insisted on taking my name and address, though I tried to refuse. What good could come of it, I reasoned? The Duke would wake in his grand house, surrounded by physicians and servants, and every comfort his wealth could provide, and he would forget the face of the seamstress who had knelt beside him in the rain. Men like him did not remember women like me. We existed only in the periphery of their vision, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. I walked home that evening instead of taking the omnibus, too dazed to navigate the practicalities of public transportation. My lodging house sat on a narrow street in Cheapside, a respectable if modest establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Penwick, who asked few questions and expected her rent on time. I climbed the stairs to my small room, peeled off my ruined clothing, and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall until darkness fell. I thought of his eyes, gray like winter storms, gray like the London sky that pressed down upon us all. I thought of the way he had looked at me, as if truly seeing me, as if I were not invisible at all. 3 days passed. I returned to my work, cutting fabric and stitching seams and delivering finished garments to houses whose residents would never know my name. The rain had stopped, but the chill remained, settling into my bones with a permanence that no amount of tea could cure. I told myself to forget the Duke of Ravenswood. I told myself that the moment had been an aberration, a brief intersection of two lives that were never meant to touch. On the 4th day, a carriage appeared outside my lodging house. I was sitting by the window, working on a particularly difficult hem, when I saw it, black and gilded, impossibly elegant against the drab gray of the street. For a moment, I convinced myself it must belong to someone else, some visitor to one of the other lodgers. But then the door opened, and the servant with kind eyes stepped out. Mrs. Penwick's voice drifted up the stairs, high and nervous. She was not accustomed to receiving visitors of quality, and her agitation was evident in every syllable. A moment later came a knock at my door. "Miss Ashford," she called, "there is a gentleman here to see you, a gentleman from a great house." My hands trembled as I set aside my sewing. I smoothed my hair, painfully aware of its plainness, of the worn fabric of my dress, of everything about myself that marked me as common. But I had done nothing wrong. I had only held an umbrella. I opened the door. The servant stood on the landing, hat in hand. "Miss Ashford," he said, with a slight bow that felt entirely inappropriate given the disparity in our circumstances. "I am Mr. Holloway, butler to His Grace the Duke of Ravenswood. His Grace requests the honor of your presence at Ravenswood House." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "I beg your pardon," I said. "His Grace wishes to thank you personally for your assistance following his accident. He has sent his carriage for your comfort." I should have refused. Every rule of propriety, every lesson my mother had taught me about knowing my place, demanded that I decline this invitation and return to my sewing. Dukes did not summon seamstresses to their homes. The very idea was absurd, potentially scandalous, certainly unwise. But I thought of his eyes, gray like winter storms, and I found myself nodding. The carriage was even more magnificent inside than out, its seats upholstered in velvet the color of midnight, its windows framed in polished wood. I sat stiffly, afraid to touch anything, afraid to breathe too deeply, lest I somehow contaminate the air with my commonness. Mr. Holloway sat across from me, maintaining a respectful silence that I appreciated more than he could know. Ravenswood House rose before us like something from a dream. I had seen grand houses before, had delivered gowns to their servants' entrances, and caught glimpses of their splendor through half-open doors. But I had never entered one through the front. I had never climbed marble steps worn smooth by generations of aristocratic feet, never passed through doors held open by footmen who bowed as if I were someone worthy of the gesture. The entrance hall alone was larger than my entire lodging house. A chandelier dripping with crystals cast rainbow patterns across the walls, and a staircase swept upward in a graceful curve that seemed to defy the very laws of architecture. I stood frozen, overwhelmed, until Mr. Holloway gently touched my elbow. "This way, miss," he said. "His Grace is waiting in the drawing room." Each step felt like a transgression. My boots, carefully polished but visibly worn, clicked against floors that had never known such humble footwear. Portraits of ancestors watched me pass, their painted eyes following my progress with what I could only imagine was disapproval. I did not belong here. Every fiber of this house proclaimed it. Every gleaming surface reflected my inadequacy back at me. Mr. Holloway opened a door, and there he was. The Duke of Ravenswood stood by the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantel, his gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart stutter. A bandage wrapped around his head, partially hidden by his dark hair, the only visible evidence of the accident that had brought us together. He was dressed impeccably, his coat perfectly tailored, his cravat tied in an intricate knot that must have taken his valet considerable time to achieve. He looked like a statue come to life, cold and perfect and utterly unreachable. "Miss Ashford," he said, and his voice was deeper than I remembered, rougher. "Please, come in." I stepped into the room, acutely aware of every flaw in my appearance, every thread loose on my dress, every strand of hair that had escaped its pins during the carriage ride. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I was alone with him. "I am told," he continued, "that you saved my life." I shook my head. "I only held an umbrella, Your Grace." Anyone would have done the same. Something flickered in his gray eyes, something I could not name. "Anyone," he repeated, and yet no one did. The street was full of people, Miss Ashford, and not one of them came forward. Only you. I did not know what to say. The truth was that I had not thought about heroism or bravery when I ran toward his fallen carriage. I had simply acted, driven by an instinct I could not explain. He crossed the room toward me, and I forced myself not to retreat. Up close, the severity of his features was even more pronounced, but I could see now the faint lines around his eyes, the shadows beneath them that spoke of sleepless nights. He was not as untouchable as he appeared. He was merely very skilled at pretending to be. "I have made inquiries," he said. "You are a seamstress, a modiste. Yes, Your Grace. You live alone. You have no family." "My mother passed 2 years ago," I said, my voice steady, despite the ache those words always brought. "I have no one else." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something I had not anticipated. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box, pressing it into my hands before I could protest. "A token of my gratitude," he said. I opened the box and found myself staring at a brooch of such exquisite beauty that tears pricked at my eyes. Sapphires surrounded by diamonds, glittering like captured starlight against dark velvet. It was worth more than I would earn in a lifetime of sewing. "I cannot accept this," I whispered. "You can," he said, and there was something in his voice that brooked no argument. "You will." I looked up at him, this cold and powerful man who had somehow decided that my small act of kindness deserved such extraordinary recompense. I should have thanked him gracefully, tucked the brooch away, and returned to my ordinary life. That was what propriety demanded. That was what wisdom counseled. But his gray eyes held mine, and in their depths I saw something I had not expected. Loneliness. A loneliness so vast and profound that it echoed my own. "Why," I asked, the word escaping before I could stop it, "why does this matter so much to you?" The Duke of Ravenswood, the most feared man in London society, looked at me with something approaching wonder. "Because no one," he said quietly, "has shown me kindness in a very long time." And in that moment, standing in his magnificent drawing room with a fortune in sapphires clutched in my hands, I understood that the carriage accident had been only the beginning, that the man before me was as broken as his ruined vehicle, and that somehow, impossibly, he had decided that I might be the one to help him find his way back to wholeness. I should have been afraid. I should have fled while I still could. Instead, I stayed. The brooch burned against my chest like a secret, hidden beneath the modest fabric of my dress where no one could see it. I had not worn it since that first day at Ravenswood House, too afraid of the questions it might invite, too uncertain of what accepting such a gift truly meant. But I could not bring myself to sell it either, though its value would have freed me from years of labor. It remained in its velvet box beneath my pillow, a reminder that for one brief moment I had been seen. I told myself that the encounter was finished, that the Duke had satisfied whatever debt he felt he owed me, and that our paths would never cross again. I returned to my sewing with renewed determination, losing myself in the rhythm of needle and thread, in the satisfaction of transforming flat fabric into garments that would grace the bodies of women who would never know my name. It was a good life, I reminded myself, a respectable life. I wanted for nothing essential, and wanting for more was a luxury I could not afford. But fate, it seemed, had other intentions. The second carriage arrived exactly 1 week after the first. I recognized it immediately, that distinctive black and gold that had become imprinted on my memory, and my heart began to race before my mind could counsel calm. This time, I did not wait to be summoned. I set aside my work and descended the stairs, meeting Mr. Holloway at the door before Mrs. Penwick could work herself into another fit of nervous excitement. "Miss Ashford," the butler said, with that same respectful bow. "His Grace requests your presence once more." I should have refused. The word formed on my lips, sensible and safe, but what emerged instead was, "Is he well? Has something happened?" Mr. Holloway's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "His Grace is in excellent health, miss. He simply wishes to see you, simply." As if there were anything simple about a duke summoning a seamstress to his home for a second time. As if the gossip had not already begun to spread through the servants' quarters, and from there to the streets, whispers about the common girl who had caught the attention of the most dangerous man in London. I went anyway. Ravenswood House was no less overwhelming the second time, but I found myself noticing details I had missed before. the way the light fell through the tall windows, painting golden rectangles on the marble floors. The subtle scent of beeswax and flowers that perfumed the air. The hushed efficiency of the servants who moved through the halls like ghosts, seeing everything and commenting on nothing. The Duke was waiting for me in a different room this time. A library whose walls were lined from floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. He stood by one of the shelves, a book open in his hands, and when he looked up at my entrance, I saw something flash across his features. Relief, perhaps, or anticipation. It vanished too quickly for me to be certain. "Miss Ashford," he said, setting the book aside, "thank you for coming." I curtsied, the motion feeling awkward and insufficient in this grand space. "Your Grace." "I confess I'm uncertain why I've been summoned." He crossed the room toward me, and I noticed that the bandage was gone from his head, leaving only a thin scar at his temple that would likely fade with time. He moved with the confident grace of a man accustomed to commanding every room he entered, and yet there was something hesitant in his approach, something almost vulnerable. "I have a proposition for you," he said. My breath caught. A proposition. The word carried weight, implications that made my cheeks flush with heat. I was not naive. I knew what men of his station sometimes proposed to women of mine, and I had spent the past week steeling myself against precisely this possibility. "Your Grace," I began, my voice carefully controlled, "if you mean to suggest something improper, I must tell you that I am not that kind of woman. I may be poor, but I am not without honor." Something shifted in his gray eyes, and to my astonishment, he laughed. It was a rough sound, rusty with disuse, as if he had forgotten how such a thing was done. "Miss Ashford," he said, "I am not propositioning your virtue. I am proposing to employ you." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "Employ me?" "As my personal seamstress. You would live here, in Ravenswood House, with a salary 3 times what you currently earn and access to the finest materials available in London. You would create garments exclusively for this household, answering to no one but myself. The offer was so unexpected, so wildly generous, that I could not immediately form a response. I stood in that magnificent library, surrounded by more books than I had seen in my entire life, and tried to understand what he was truly asking. "Why?" I finally managed. "Why would you do this?" The Duke turned away, walking to the window where gray afternoon light spilled into the room. "Because I find myself in your debt, Miss Ashford, and a brooch is not sufficient repayment for a life. Because my household requires a seamstress, and you are skilled at your craft. And because," he paused, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, "I find that I wish to see you again." The honesty of this admission struck me like a physical blow. Men like him did not say such things to women like me. They did not admit to wishes or wants or anything that might suggest vulnerability. They commanded and expected obedience. They took what they desired and discarded what no longer pleased them. They did not stand at windows, their proud shoulders slightly bowed, confessing that they wished to see a seamstress again. I should have said no. Every rational part of my mind screamed that this was dangerous, that living under his roof would destroy what little reputation I possessed, that wanting to see him again was not a sufficient reason to upend my entire existence. But I remembered his eyes in the rain, gray and lost and desperately alone. I remembered the way he had said that no one had shown him kindness in a very long time. And I thought of my small room in Cheapside, my endless hours of solitary work, my evenings spent staring at walls and wondering if this was all my life would ever be. "I accept," I said, and watched something like joy transform his severe features into momentary beauty. The transition happened more quickly than I could have imagined. Within 3 days, my meager possessions had been transported to Ravenswood House, and I had been installed in a suite of rooms more luxurious than anything I had ever dreamed of occupying. The bedroom alone was larger than my entire previous lodging, with a 4-poster bed draped in silk and a fireplace that servants kept burning throughout the day and night. Adjacent to it was a private sitting room that had been converted into a workroom, equipped with every tool and material I could possibly need. I tried to protest the extravagance, but the Duke would hear none of it. "You are part of this household now," he said firmly. "You will be treated accordingly." What I had not anticipated was the hostility that awaited me. Lady Cordelia Thorne, the Dowager Duchess and Edmund's mother, made her displeasure known from the moment of my arrival. She was a formidable woman in her 6th decade, her silver hair swept into an elaborate arrangement, her bearing as rigid as the whalebone corset that surely confined her. She had the same gray eyes as her son, but where his held storms, hers held ice. "So this is the creature my son has brought into our home," she said upon our first meeting, her gaze traveling over me with undisguised contempt. "A seamstress. How quaint." I curtsied deeply, refusing to let her disdain rattle me. "My lady, I am honored to serve the household." "Serve?" Lady Cordelia's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Is that what we are calling it? I have heard different words used in the drawing rooms of London, words far less flattering. The implication was clear, and it cut as deeply as she intended. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but forced myself to meet her eyes. "I am here to sew, my lady. Nothing more." "We shall see," she said, and swept from the room in a rustle of black silk. The days that followed established a pattern I had not anticipated. The Duke, it seemed, had not exaggerated his desire to see me. Each morning, he would summon me to his study under some pretext, requesting measurements for a new waistcoat or opinions on fabric samples that had arrived from various merchants. These consultations stretched longer than necessary, our conversations drifting from the practical to the personal, and I found myself learning the contours of his life. His father had died when he was young, leaving him with a title he had never wanted and responsibilities that weighed upon him like chains. His mother had raised him with an iron hand, determined that he should embody the cold perfection expected of his station. He had learned early that vulnerability was weakness, that emotion was liability, that a duke must be feared rather than loved. And yet, with me, he was different. The severity softened when we were alone together. He asked about my childhood, my mother, the circumstances that had led me to become a seamstress. He listened with an attention I had never experienced from anyone, as if my small life were as worthy of interest as the grand affairs of state that filled his days. "You speak of your mother with such love," he observed one afternoon, as rain streamed down the windows of his study. That was something I never knew. My mother viewed me as an heir first and a son second. Perhaps not even second. I set aside the cravat I had been hemming and looked at him, this powerful man who had never known a mother's unconditional affection. "She must have loved you in her own way," I offered gently. His laugh was bitter. "Cordelia Thorne loves only two things, Miss Ashford, the family name and her own position. I was merely the vessel through which both could be preserved. I wanted to reach out to him then, to offer some physical comfort for the pain I heard beneath his words. But such intimacy was not permitted between us, would never be permitted, and so I kept my hands folded in my lap and offered what I could. Perhaps, I said carefully, love can be learned. Perhaps it is not too late." His gray eyes met mine, and in them I saw a flicker of something that made my heart ache. "Perhaps," he agreed quietly. "Perhaps it is not." The gifts began soon after. At first they were practical things, easily justified within the bounds of our arrangement. Fabric of such exquisite quality that working with it felt like a privilege. New scissors, perfectly balanced and sharp. A sewing box of polished mahogany, fitted with compartments for every tool I could imagine needing. But gradually, they became more personal. A book of poetry I had mentioned admiring, left on my workroom table with no note. A cashmere shawl in a shade of blue that matched my eyes, delivered by a servant who claimed His Grace had seen it and thought of me. A pair of gloves so soft they felt like wearing clouds, accompanied by a card that bore only his initials. I tried to refuse them. "Your Grace," I said one evening when he came to inspect a coat I had completed, "this is too much. People will talk." "Let them talk," he replied. And there was something fierce in his voice that silenced my protests. "You saved my life, Vivian. You saw me bleeding in the mud, and you did not look away. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand what it meant to open my eyes and see your face above me, to know that someone in this world cared whether I lived or died?" It was the first time he had used my Christian name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a shiver through me that I could not suppress. "You have a household full of people who care," I said weakly. "Servants who depend upon you. A mother who, whatever her faults, surely does not wish you harm." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the sandalwood of his cologne, could see the individual threads of silver that were beginning to appear at his temples. "They care about the Duke of Ravenswood," he said softly. "About the title, the fortune, the power. You are the first person in longer than I can remember who looked at Edmund Thorne and saw a man worth saving." I did not know how to respond. The space between us felt charged, electric, filled with possibilities that terrified me as much as they thrilled. I was acutely aware of my position, of the thousand reasons why what I felt stirring in my heart was impossible, inappropriate, destined only for heartbreak. "I saw a man in need," I finally managed, "that is all." His smile was sad and knowing. "You are a poor liar, Miss Ashford." Before I could respond, the door opened and Lady Cordelia swept into the room. Her eyes took in our proximity, the flushed state of my cheeks, the way Edmund stepped back with an expression of irritation at the interruption. "Edmund," she said coolly, "Lord and Lady Ashworth have arrived for dinner. You are expected in the drawing room." "Of course, Mother." He turned to me, his expression carefully neutral once more. "Thank you for your work on the coat, Miss Ashford. It is exceptional." He left without another word, and I was alone with the Dowager Duchess. She did not speak at first, merely studied me with those cold gray eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. When she finally broke the silence, her voice was soft and dangerous. "I know what you are doing," she said. "I have seen ambitious women before, common creatures who think they can elevate themselves by catching the eye of a man above their station. It never ends well for them." "I am not ambitious," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I am a seamstress doing the work I was hired to do." Lady Cordelia laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "You are a fool if you believe that is all this is. My son is vulnerable in ways he does not understand, damaged by experiences he refuses to discuss. He sees your kindness and mistakes it for something more. But kindness from someone like you comes with a price, does it not? You are waiting for him to offer more, a permanent position, a settlement, perhaps even marriage if you are truly deluded." The accusation stung more than I wanted to admit, perhaps because some small part of me wondered if there was truth in it. But I lifted my chin and met her gaze without flinching. "I expect nothing from your son except fair wages for honest work," I said. "Whatever feelings may or may not exist between us, I am not foolish enough to imagine they could lead anywhere. I know my place, my lady, even if you believe otherwise." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps at my refusal to cower. "See that you remember it," she said finally. "Because if you do anything to harm my son or this family's reputation, I will destroy you so thoroughly that not even your memory will remain." She left me standing in the workroom, my hands trembling, my heart racing with a combination of fear and defiance. The Dowager Duchess had declared war, and I was armed with nothing but a needle and thread. But as I stood there in the fading light, surrounded by the finest fabrics money could buy, I realized something that both terrified and exhilarated me. I was not going to run. whatever dangers awaited me in this house, whatever enemies I had made simply by existing in Edmund's orbit, I was not going to retreat to the safety of my former life. Because somewhere between the rain-soaked street and this magnificent prison, I had begun to feel something I had thought lost to me forever. I had begun to feel hope. 3 months passed in Ravenswood House, and I learned that comfort could become its own kind of cage. The silk sheets, the roaring fires, the endless supply of whatever my heart desired, all of it wrapped around me like golden chains, binding me to a life I had never sought and could not seem to leave. I told myself it was the work that kept me there, the satisfaction of creating beautiful things with materials I had only dreamed of touching. But in the quiet hours of the night, when honesty crept past my defenses, I knew the truth. It was him. It had always been him. Edmund and I had developed a routine that existed outside the formal structures of household hierarchy. Each evening, after the servants had retired and his mother had withdrawn to her chambers, he would come to my workroom. He claimed he wished to see my progress on various projects, but the garments were merely pretexts. We would talk for hours, our conversations ranging from philosophy to poetry to the small absurdities of daily life. He would sit in the chair by the fire while I sewed, and sometimes we would simply exist in companionable silence. 2 lonely souls who had somehow found shelter in each other's presence. I learned the landscape of his pain during those evenings. His father had been a cruel man, given to rages that left marks on both body and spirit. Edmund had been beaten for showing weakness, mocked for any display of emotion, trained from infancy to believe that love was a commodity to be withheld rather than freely given. His mother had never intervened, had in fact reinforced these lessons with her own particular brand of cold instruction. By the time he inherited the dukedom at 17, Edmund Thorne had been transformed into exactly what his parents intended, a man incapable of vulnerability, armored against the world by walls of ice and stone. But the walls were crumbling. I could see it in the way his eyes softened when he looked at me, in the small smiles that escaped before he could suppress them, in the way his hand would brush against mine when passing me a cup of tea and linger just a moment too long. We were dancing along the edge of something neither of us dared name, and with each passing day the music grew louder, the steps more difficult to resist. The household noticed, of course. Margaret Holloway, the head housekeeper and wife to the butler who had first brought me here, became something like a friend to me during those months. She was a practical woman in her 5th decade, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, but beneath her brisk exterior lay a kindness that had sustained me through many difficult moments. "You must be careful," she warned me one afternoon as we walked through the garden. "The staff talk, and what the staff talk about reaches the ears of those who should not hear it." "I know," I said, though the words felt hollow. "There is nothing improper happening between us, Margaret. We only talk." She gave me a look that suggested she saw through this particular fiction. "Talking can be more dangerous than touching, Miss Ashford. His Grace has never spoken to anyone the way he speaks to you. The whole house knows it. And if the house knows, then soon all of London will know." Her warning proved prophetic sooner than either of us anticipated. The invitation arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, delivered on heavy cream paper embossed with the Ashworth family crest. Lord and Lady Ashworth were hosting their annual winter ball, and the Duke of Ravenswood was expected to attend. This was nothing unusual. Edmund was invited to dozens of such events each season, though he attended only those where his absence would cause more gossip than his presence. What was unusual was the second invitation, addressed to me. I stared at the paper in disbelief, certain there had been some mistake. Miss Vivian Ashford was requested to attend as a guest of the Duke of Ravenswood, not as a servant, not as some anonymous seamstress hidden in the workrooms, as a guest. "He cannot be serious," I whispered to Margaret, who had brought me the invitation with an expression of barely concealed alarm. "His Grace rarely jokes," she replied, "and never about matters of society. I found him in his study that afternoon, standing before the window with his hands clasped behind his back in that way he had when wrestling with difficult thoughts. The invitation lay open on his desk, and when he turned to face me, I saw both determination and uncertainty in his gray eyes. "Before you refuse," he said, "let me explain. Explain why you would destroy my reputation and your own." I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Edmund, this is madness. I cannot attend a society ball. I am a seamstress. The moment I walk through those doors, every person in that room will know exactly what I am. What you are," he said quietly, "is the finest woman I have ever known. What you are is someone who deserves to be seen, truly seen, not hidden away like a shameful secret." "I am not ashamed of my position." "No," he agreed, "but I am ashamed of a society that would hide you simply because your father was not a lord. I am ashamed of rules that declare your worth based on the circumstances of your birth rather than the content of your character." He crossed the room toward me, and I saw in his face an emotion I had not expected: desperation. As if this invitation were not merely a social gesture, but something far more significant. "I have spent my entire life doing what was expected of me," he continued, "attending the correct events, speaking the correct words, marrying the correct woman. It brought me nothing but emptiness. For once, Vivian, I wish to do something because it is what I want. And what I want is to walk into that ballroom with you beside me." The use of my name still had the power to make my heart stutter. "Edmund," I said softly, "you must understand what this will mean. Your mother will be furious. Society will talk. There may be consequences neither of us can predict. Let them talk. Let there be consequences." He reached out and took my hand, the first time he had touched me so deliberately since my arrival in his home. "I am tired of being the Duke of Ravenswood. For one night, I wish simply to be Edmund, and I wish to spend that night with you." I should have said no. Every instinct of self-preservation, every lesson I had learned about the dangers of reaching beyond my station, demanded refusal. But his hand was warm around mine, and his eyes held something I had not seen in them before: hope, fragile and uncertain, but unmistakably present. "Very well," I heard myself say, "but I have nothing suitable to wear." His smile transformed his severe features into something approaching beauty. "Then I suppose you had better make something." The 2 weeks before the ball passed in a blur of fabric and thread. I worked longer hours than I had since my days in Cheapside, designing and creating a gown that would allow me to hold my head high among women who had been born to silk and jewels. I chose midnight blue velvet, rich and deep, with a bodice that flattered without revealing too much, sleeves that tapered elegantly to my wrists, and a skirt that moved like water when I walked. It was the finest thing I had ever made, and when I looked at my reflection in the mirror on the evening of the ball, I barely recognized the woman who stared back at me. Margaret helped me dress, her capable hands arranging my hair into an elegant twist and fastening the sapphire brooch, Edmund's first gift to me, at my throat. She stepped back and studied me with an expression I could not quite read. "You look like you belong in that gown," she said finally. "Like you were born to wear it." "I was born to sew it," I corrected gently. "Let us not pretend otherwise." She shook her head. "Some things, Miss Ashford, have nothing to do with birth." Edmund waited for me at the bottom of the grand staircase, and when he saw me descending, something happened to his face that I will remember until my dying day. The mask he wore for the world fell away entirely, leaving only naked wonder in its wake. He looked at me as if I were not a seamstress from Cheapside, but something precious beyond measure, something he had searched for all his life and never expected to find. "You are," he began, then stopped, seeming unable to complete the thought. I reached the bottom of the stairs and curtsied, as much to hide my burning cheeks as to show respect. "Your Grace is too kind." "Edmund," he corrected, offering his arm. "Tonight and every night hereafter, I am Edmund." Lady Cordelia emerged from the drawing room at precisely that moment, and the expression on her face could have frozen the Thames in midsummer. She was resplendent in black silk, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears, every inch the Dowager Duchess. But her eyes, fixed on my hand where it rested on her son's arm, burned with a fury that made my blood run cold. "Edmund," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "surely you cannot mean to go through with this farce." "It is no farce, Mother. Miss Ashford is my guest for the evening. Miss Ashford is a servant. She has no place at the Ashworth ball, and if you insist on parading her before society, you will bring shame upon this family that will take generations to erase." Edmund's arm tensed beneath my fingers, but his voice remained steady. "Then shame we shall have. Come, Vivian. The carriage is waiting." We left Lady Cordelia standing in the entrance hall, her face a mask of impotent rage, and I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter air. I had made an enemy tonight, a powerful enemy with resources and connections far beyond anything I could match. Whatever happened at the ball, there would be a reckoning. The Ashworth residence blazed with light, every window glowing golden against the dark December sky. Carriages lined the circular drive, discharging passengers in clouds of silk and velvet, the cream of London society gathering for what promised to be the event of the season. My heart hammered against my ribs as we approached, and I gripped Edmund's arm perhaps more tightly than propriety allowed. "Courage," he murmured, close to my ear. "You have already survived being covered in mud while holding an umbrella over an unconscious duke. This cannot possibly be worse." Despite my terror, I found myself smiling. "You have a peculiar notion of encouragement, Your Grace." "Edmund," he reminded me, and led me into the light. The ballroom was a cathedral of glamour, its walls lined with mirrors that multiplied the already impossible number of candles until the entire space seemed to exist within a single flame. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, and an orchestra played from a raised platform at the far end, filling the air with music that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and everyone, without exception, stopped to stare at us. I felt their gazes like physical weight, pressing down upon me from every direction. I saw fans raised to hide whispered conversations, saw eyebrows lifted in shock or disdain, saw the careful masks of society shift to reveal the judgment beneath. They knew. Of course they knew. In a world where gossip traveled faster than carriages, where servants talked and secrets were currency, they had known about me before I ever set foot in this room. Edmund's hand covered mine where it rested on his arm, warm and steady. "Let them look," he said quietly. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." We walked forward into the lion's den. Lady Ashworth greeted us with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying to Edmund before turning her attention to me. "And this must be the young woman we have heard so much about." "Miss Ashford, is it?" "It is," I confirmed, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will. "Thank you for the invitation, my lady." "Oh, the invitation was His Grace's idea," she replied, her tone carrying implications I chose not to examine. "We are always happy to accommodate the Duke's wishes." We moved past her into the crowd, and I felt the whispers follow us like shadows. I caught fragments of conversation as we passed, common girl, grasping, shameless. Each word was a small wound, but I refused to let them see me bleed. Then a voice cut through the murmur, a voice that made Edmund's entire body go rigid. Ravenswood. What an unexpected pleasure. I turned to find a man approaching us, tall and golden-haired, with the kind of handsome face that graced romantic paintings. His smile was charming, his manner impeccable, but there was something in his blue eyes that made my skin crawl, a coldness that his pleasant exterior could not quite disguise. "Fairfax," Edmund said, and his voice had become the voice of the Duke of Ravenswood, cold and hard as iron. "I have been hoping to see you," the man continued, his gaze sliding to me with an interest that felt like violation. "And this must be the famous Miss Ashford." the seamstress who saved the great Duke's life with nothing but an umbrella and determination. "You have me at a disadvantage, sir," I said. "I do not believe we have been introduced. How remiss of me. Lord Sebastian Fairfax, at your service." His bow was perfectly correct and somehow insulting. "Edmund and I are old friends, though I use the term loosely. We have a great deal of history between us." "History," Edmund repeated, and there was a warning in his tone that even I could hear. "Some history is best left buried, Fairfax. Is it?" Lord Sebastian's smile widened, taking on an edge that turned my blood to ice. I have always found that buried things have a way of rising to the surface, particularly secrets, particularly painful ones. He turned to me then, and I saw something calculated in his expression, something that told me this encounter was not accidental. "Miss Ashford, perhaps you would honor me with a dance. I would so enjoy getting to know the woman who has captured Ravenswood's attention so thoroughly." Before I could respond, Edmund stepped forward, placing himself between us. "Miss Ashford's dances are spoken for." "All of them?" Lord Sebastian laughed. "How possessive you have become. One might almost think you had feelings for the girl. How very unlike you, Edmund. How very human." He walked away, still laughing, and I felt Edmund trembling beside me with what I realized was barely suppressed rage. "Who is he?" I asked quietly. "What history do you share?" Edmund did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained. "Sebastian Fairfax was once engaged to someone I loved. He destroyed her, and he has never forgiven me for trying to stop him. I wanted to ask more, but the orchestra began a new piece, and couples started moving toward the dance floor." Edmund turned to me, his gray eyes intense. "Dance with me," he said. "Please." I had never danced at a ball before, never moved through the elegant patterns of society with hundreds of eyes watching my every step. But I took his hand and let him lead me onto the floor, and somehow, impossibly, my feet remembered movements my mind had never learned. We danced in silence at first, too aware of our audience to risk conversation. But gradually the world around us began to fade, the watching eyes and whispered judgments receding until there was nothing but the music and the warmth of his hand at my waist and the way his eyes never left mine. "You dance beautifully," he said at last. "I have no idea how," I admitted. "I have never been taught. Perhaps some things do not require teaching." His voice dropped lower, meant only for me. "Perhaps some things are simply meant to be." The music swelled toward its climax, and as we turned through the final movements, I saw Lady Cordelia watching us from across the room. Her face was utterly composed, but beside her stood Lord Sebastian Fairfax, and they were speaking with an intimacy that suggested alliance rather than mere acquaintance. A cold finger of dread traced down my spine. The music ended. We separated, and I curtsied while Edmund bowed, and for one perfect moment we smiled at each other like two people who had forgotten to be afraid. Then the screaming began. A woman near the entrance had collapsed, or so it appeared, and the crowd was rushing toward the commotion. But as the chaos parted, I saw that it was not a medical emergency that had caused the disruption. It was a woman. A beautiful woman with dark hair and wild eyes, wearing a gown that had clearly once been fine, but was now worn and stained. She stood in the center of the ballroom, pointing directly at Edmund, and her voice rang out with the clarity of a bell. "There he is," she cried. "There is the Duke of Ravenswood, the man who ruined me and cast me aside, the man who promised me everything and left me with nothing." Edmund had gone pale as death. Beside me, I heard him whisper a single word. "Isabel." And in that moment, watching his face transform with guilt and grief and something terribly like recognition, I understood that there were secrets in his past far darker than any I had imagined. Secrets that had found me at last. The ballroom erupted into chaos around me, but I could not move, could not breathe, could only stare at the woman who had shattered the evening with her wild accusations. Isabel. The name echoed in my mind like a funeral bell, and I watched Edmund's face transform with an anguish so profound that it seemed to strip away every defense he had ever built. She was beautiful, even in her obvious distress. Dark hair tumbled around shoulders that had once been elegant, but now showed the marks of hardship. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, blazed with a fury that transcended mere anger. This was something older, deeper, a wound that had festered in darkness and finally burst into the light. Lord Ashworth's servants were moving toward her, clearly intending to remove her from the premises, but Edmund raised his hand to stop them. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper. "Let her speak." The crowd fell silent, every fan stilled, every breath held. Society had come to the ball expecting entertainment, and they had received something far more valuable: scandal. The kind of scandal that would be discussed in drawing rooms for years to come. Isabel laughed, a broken sound that held no joy. "Let me speak? How generous, Your Grace, how very noble. You were not so generous 5 years ago when you abandoned me, when you left me to face the consequences of your affections alone." I felt as though the floor had shifted beneath my feet. 5 years ago. Edmund had never spoken of any woman from his past, had never hinted at the existence of someone who might have claims upon his heart. I had believed myself the first to breach his walls, the first to see the man beneath the Duke. Now I understood how wrong I had been. Edmund stepped forward, his movements careful, as one might approach a wounded animal. "Isabel," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "What happened between us was not what you believe. If you would only let me explain." "Explain?" Her voice rose to a shriek. "Explain how you seduced me with promises of marriage. Explain how you made me believe I would be your duchess, then cast me aside when your mother deemed me unsuitable." "I was a gentleman's daughter, Edmund. I was not some common girl off the streets." Her gaze found me then, and the venom in her eyes made me take an involuntary step backward. "But it seems your standards have fallen even further," she continued, her lip curling with contempt. "A seamstress. At least I had breeding, even if I lacked fortune. What does this creature have? A pretty face and an umbrella?" The cruelty of her words cut deep, but I forced myself to remain still. This was not my battle, not my history. Whatever had happened between Edmund and this woman, it predated my arrival in his life by years. Enough. The word came from Lady Cordelia, who had materialized beside her son like a spectre in black silk. "Miss Weston, you forget yourself. Whatever grievances you imagine you have, this is neither the time nor the place to air them." "Grievances, I imagine." Isabel's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "You destroyed me, Lady Cordelia, you and your son together. You told my family I was unsuitable for the Thorne bloodline, that I had behaved improperly with your son, that no respectable family should receive me. You ruined my reputation so thoroughly that no man would have me. I have spent 5 years in exile because of you." The truth began to crystallize in my mind, terrible and clear. Edmund had loved this woman once, had perhaps intended to marry her, and his mother had intervened, had wielded the weapons of society with devastating precision, had destroyed a young woman's life to preserve the family honor. I looked at Edmund and saw the confirmation in his eyes. Guilt, grief, and beneath them both, a helpless rage that had never found its proper target. "Miss Weston was removed from our lives because she proved herself unworthy," Lady Cordelia said, her voice cold as winter ice. "The details are not fit for public discussion, but rest assured, everything that was done for the protection of this family. Lies." Isabel spat the word. "Everything you touch turns to lies. You never gave me a chance to defend myself. You simply decided that I was not good enough, and you convinced your son to abandon me. I did not abandon you. Edmund's voice was raw. I was told you had married another. I was told you had left London willingly. When I learned the truth, it was too late. You had disappeared, and no amount of searching could find you. For the first time, something other than rage flickered across Isabel's features. Confusion, uncertainty, the smallest crack in her armor of fury. "You searched for me?" she asked, her voice suddenly small. "For 2 years. I hired investigators. I traveled to every place we had ever spoken of visiting together." Edmund's hands were shaking, I realized. This man who never showed weakness was trembling before the assembled cream of society. "I never stopped searching until I was told you were dead." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the orchestra had ceased playing, their instruments hanging forgotten in their hands. "Dead?" Isabel's voice was barely a whisper. "Someone told you I was dead?" "A letter arrived at Ravenswood House. It bore your family's seal. It stated that you had succumbed to fever while abroad." Edmund closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "I mourned you, Isabel. For 3 years I wore nothing but black. I shut myself away from all society because the world seemed empty without you in it. The transformation in Isabel was remarkable to witness. The fury drained from her face, replaced by bewilderment and the first trembling hints of grief. "I never sent such a letter," she said. "My family cast me out. They would not have written on my behalf." "Then who?" Edmund asked. But even as the words left his lips, I saw the answer dawn in his eyes. The same answer that had formed in my own mind. Both of them turned to look at Lady Cordelia. The Dowager Duchess stood perfectly still, her face betraying nothing. But I had learned to read the subtle signs of guilt in my months at Ravenswood House, and I saw it now in the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible lift of her chin. "You," Isabel breathed. "You sent that letter. You made him believe I was dead." Lady Cordelia's composure finally cracked, just slightly. "I did what was necessary to protect this family. That girl was never suitable for you, Edmund. Her bloodline was questionable, her fortune non-existent, and her behavior." She cast a contemptuous glance at Isabel, clearly left much to be desired. "I saved you from a disastrous match. You destroyed both our lives." Edmund's voice had gone quiet in a way that frightened me more than shouting would have. "You made me believe the woman I loved was dead. You condemned her to 5 years of exile and poverty, and you did it all without a shred of remorse. Remorse is a luxury for those who make mistakes." Lady Cordelia drew herself up to her full height. "I made no mistake. I made a choice. The choice any mother would make to protect her son from ruin." The room had become unbearable to me. I could not look at Edmund's anguished face, could not witness the wreckage of 2 lives laid bare before hundreds of eager eyes. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to be anywhere but here, drowning in revelations that changed everything I thought I knew. I turned and walked toward the terrace doors, moving as quickly as my gown would allow without breaking into an undignified run. Behind me, I heard Edmund call my name, but I did not stop. I could not stop. If I stopped, I would shatter. The terrace was empty, the cold December air biting through the thin fabric of my gown. I gripped the stone balustrade and gasped for breath, trying to steady the wild beating of my heart. He had loved her, had mourned her, had worn black for 3 years because he believed she was dead. Whatever feelings he had developed for me, they were built on the ashes of a love so profound that losing it had nearly destroyed him. How foolish I had been, how desperately, pathetically foolish. I had allowed myself to believe that I was special, that his attention to me meant something unique and precious, but I was merely a replacement, a pale substitute for the woman he had truly wanted, Vivian. His voice came from behind me, and I squeezed my eyes shut against the tears that threatened to fall. "Please," I said, "please just give me a moment." "I cannot." I heard his footsteps approach, felt the warmth of him as he stopped just behind me. "I cannot let you stand here believing whatever terrible things you are telling yourself." I forced myself to turn and face him. In the moonlight, his features were stark and beautiful, his gray eyes luminous with emotion. "You loved her," I said. "You mourned her for 3 years, and now she is alive, and she is here, and nothing between us can ever be what I thought it was." Edmund reached out and took my hands in his. His fingers were cold from the night air, but his grip was firm. "Listen to me, Vivian. What I felt for Isabel was real. I will not dishonor either of you by denying it. But that was 5 years ago. I was a different man then, younger, more naive. I believed that love was enough to overcome any obstacle. My mother's cruelty taught me otherwise." "And now?" I asked, hating the tremor in my voice. "Now that you know she lives? Now that you know the truth of what happened?" "Now," he said, "I understand something I did not understand then. What I felt for Isabel was passion. It burned bright and fast and left nothing but ashes in its wake. But what I feel for you, Vivian—" He paused, struggling for words. "What I feel for you is different." It grew slowly, from small moments of kindness and conversation and simply existing together. It does not burn, it warms, and I believe it will last. I wanted to believe him. God help me. I wanted it more than I had ever wanted anything. But the image of Isabel's face, beautiful even in her rage, haunted me. "She deserves answers," I said. "She deserves justice for what was done to her." "Yes," Edmund agreed, "and she will have both. But that does not mean I am obligated to love her again. Love cannot be commanded back into existence simply because circumstances have changed." I looked up at him. This man who had shown me kindness when kindness was not required, who had seen something in a rain-soaked seamstress worth treasuring. His eyes held nothing but sincerity, and I felt something loosen in my chest. "Your mother will never accept me," I said. "She has already destroyed one woman who sought to claim your heart. What makes you think she will not do the same to me?" "Because I am not the boy I was 5 years ago." Edmund's voice hardened with determination. "I allowed my mother to control my life, to make decisions that should have been mine alone. I was weak, Vivian. I let her convince me that her cruelty was protection, that her manipulation was love. I will not make that mistake again." From inside, we heard the sounds of the ball resuming, the orchestra striking up a new piece as society attempted to paper over the scandal with music and dancing. The night would be discussed for months, perhaps years, but life would go on. It always did. "Edmund," I said carefully, "what will you do?" "About Isabel. About your mother." His jaw tightened. "Isabel will receive whatever support she needs to rebuild her life. A settlement, introductions to society, whatever it takes to restore what my family stole from her. She is owed that much, and more. As for my mother—" He trailed off, and I saw the conflict in his eyes. Whatever Lady Cordelia had done, she was still the woman who had given him life. The ties of blood were not easily severed, even when stained with betrayal. "She cannot remain at Ravenswood House," he continued finally. "Not after what she has done. I will establish her in the Dower House, with an income sufficient for her comfort. But she will no longer have any role in running the household or any influence over my decisions." "She will hate you for it," I said. "She has never loved me," Edmund replied, and though his voice was steady, I heard the old wound beneath. "She has only ever loved what I represent. The title, the lineage, the continuation of everything she believes matters. Perhaps removing me from her grasp will finally force her to examine what truly does." We stood together in the cold moonlight, Two people who had stumbled into each other's lives through accident and circumstance, now facing a future neither of us could have predicted. The challenges ahead were immense. Society would not easily accept a seamstress as the companion of a duke. Lady Cordelia would not surrender her influence without a fight. And somewhere inside that ballroom, Isabel Weston was recalibrating her understanding of the past 5 years, and I could not predict what she might do with her newfound knowledge. But Edmund's hand was warm in mine, and his eyes held a promise that required no words. "We should return," I said reluctantly. "People will talk." "Let them," he replied, echoing his words from weeks before. "I am done hiding what I feel. I am done pretending that propriety matters more than truth." He offered me his arm, and together we walked back into the light. The weeks that followed the Ashworth ball were among the most turbulent of my life. Society split into factions, some condemning Edmund for his scandalous attachment to a common seamstress, others praising his courage in defying convention. The newspapers printed veiled references to unnamed dukes and mysterious women, and more than one caricature appeared in shop windows depicting a noble figure sheltering beneath a tattered umbrella. Lady Cordelia was installed in the Dower House as Edmund had promised, her departure from Ravenswood House accomplished with a minimum of drama but a maximum of icy silence. She passed me in the hallway on her final evening, her face a mask of controlled fury. "You think you have won," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You think that because my son has chosen you, you are safe. But men like Edmund do not marry women like you. They amuse themselves for a time, and then they remember their duty. You will be cast aside eventually, just as Isabel was. The only question is how much dignity you will retain when it happens." I did not respond. What could I say to a woman so thoroughly convinced of her own righteousness? I simply stepped aside and let her pass, watching as she swept out of the house she had ruled for decades, reduced now to exile by the son she had sought to control. Isabel proved more complicated. Edmund met with her privately several times in those first weeks, and though I was not present for their conversations, I saw the toll they took on him. He would return from these meetings pale and exhausted, saying little but holding me close as if I were the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with uncertainty. "She hates me," he admitted one evening as we sat together in his study. "Not for what I did, but for what I did not do. I should have fought harder for her. I should have defied my mother openly instead of accepting the lies I was told." "You were young," I reminded him. "You trusted your family. Youth is not an excuse for cowardice." His voice was bitter. "I failed her, Vivian. I cannot undo that failure, no matter how much money I offer or how many doors I open for her." "Then perhaps," I said slowly, "the best you can do is not fail again. With anyone." He looked at me then, his gray eyes searching my face for something I could not name. "You are remarkably forgiving," he said. "Most women in your position would be jealous, would demand that I cut all ties with Isabel." "I am not most women," I replied, "and jealousy serves no purpose. Isabel suffered because of your family's cruelty. Helping her heal does not threaten what exists between us unless you allow it to." His smile was small but genuine. "How did I find you, Vivian Ashford? What miracle of fate placed you on that street corner in the rain?" "No miracle," I said, returning his smile. "Just a broken carriage and a stubborn seamstress who did not know enough to walk away." Spring arrived slowly that year, creeping into London with hesitant warmth and tentative blossoms. I continued my work as seamstress to the household, though my duties had evolved considerably from those first days. I was no longer merely an employee. I was something else entirely, something for which society had no proper name, and I had ceased trying to define it. Lord Sebastian Fairfax had not been idle during these months. He had positioned himself as Isabel's champion, appearing at every gathering where she was present, offering his arm and his sympathy with an attentiveness that raised my suspicions. Edmund dismissed my concerns initially, pointing out that Fairfax had always been drawn to women in distress. But I could not shake the feeling that something darker lurked beneath his gallant exterior. My suspicions were confirmed on a mild April evening when Margaret came to my workroom with an expression of barely contained alarm. "Miss Ashford," she said, "you must come quickly. There is a situation in the drawing room." I followed her through the halls, my heart racing with unnamed dread. The drawing room doors were closed, but I could hear voices within, one of them raised in what sounded like desperation. I opened the doors to find Isabel standing in the center of the room, a sheaf of papers clutched in her trembling hands. Across from her stood Lord Sebastian Fairfax, his handsome face twisted into something ugly. And between them, Edmund, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. "Vivian," Edmund said without turning, "you should hear this." I stepped inside, closing the doors behind me. Isabel looked at me with eyes red from weeping, and in that moment I saw not the woman who had screamed accusations at a ball, but someone exhausted and afraid. "Tell her," Edmund commanded. "Tell her what you just told me." Isabel swallowed hard. "Lord Fairfax approached me weeks ago. He said he wanted to help me. He said he knew the truth about what Lady Cordelia had done, and he could help me achieve justice. But his price was information. Information about Edmund, about his business dealings, about the secrets of this house." My blood ran cold. "He was using you," I said, "to hurt Edmund. I did not realize it at first." Isabel's voice broke. "He was so kind, so sympathetic. But then he started asking questions that had nothing to do with my grievances. He wanted to know about Edmund's finances, his political connections, his vulnerabilities. When I refused to help him, he threatened to expose me as a liar, to claim that my accusations at the ball were fabricated, that I had never known Edmund at all." "And these papers?" Edmund asked, gesturing to the documents in her hands. "Letters," Isabel whispered. "Letters he wrote to Lady Cordelia 5 years ago, before I was cast out. They were working together, Edmund, Lord Fairfax and your mother. They orchestrated everything. My ruin, the false letter announcing my death, all of it." The room seemed to tilt around me. Lord Sebastian Fairfax, Edmund's rival and enemy, had been in league with Lady Cordelia all along. The destruction of Isabel had not been merely a mother's misguided protection of her son. It had been a calculated strike in a war I had not known was being waged. "Why?" I asked, the word barely a whisper. "Why would he do this?" "Because I humiliated him once," Edmund replied, his voice heavy with old anger. "Years ago, before Isabel, Fairfax sought to marry my sister. I discovered he was after her fortune, not her heart, and I exposed him. He has never forgiven me. So he allied with your mother," I continued, piecing together the threads. "He helped her destroy your happiness as revenge for destroying his plans. And he is not finished." Edmund took the letters from Isabel's hands and set them on the desk. "These prove conspiracy, but they prove something else as well. Something my mother hoped would never come to light." He looked at me, and in his gray eyes I saw a resolve that both thrilled and frightened me. Fairfax's letters contain references to documents he holds, documents that could destroy him if they were made public. He has been using them as leverage against my mother for years, which is why she has never moved against him, despite knowing what he is. "What kind of documents?" I asked. "The kind that prove embezzlement, fraud, and the ruination of no fewer than 3 other families before Isabel." Edmund's smile was cold. "Lord Sebastian Fairfax has built his fortune on the suffering of others, and I intend to bring him down." I looked at Isabel, standing broken and weary in the center of the room, and I understood something important. This woman was not my enemy. She had never been my enemy. She was merely another victim of the cruelty that infected the highest reaches of society, another casualty of ambition and revenge. I crossed the room and took her hands in mine. She flinched at first, surprised by the gesture, but did not pull away. "Whatever happens next," I said quietly, "you are not alone. You have allies now. Real allies who do not seek to use you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me? I have been nothing but cruel to you." "Because cruelty only breeds more cruelty," I replied, "and someone has to be the first to stop." Edmund watched us with an expression I could not quite read. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "This is why I love you," he said. The words hung in the air, simple and profound, the first time he had spoken them aloud. I looked up at him, this complicated man who had fought so hard against his own heart, and I smiled. "I know," I said. "I have known for some time." And I felt, for the first time since that rainy afternoon on a London street, that perhaps I had finally found the place where I belonged. The downfall of Lord Sebastian Fairfax began with a letter and ended with a confession, though the weeks between those two events contained enough drama to fill a dozen novels. Edmund moved with the careful precision of a chess master, gathering evidence, building alliances, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I watched from the periphery, contributing what I could, marveling at the transformation in the man I had come to love. The cold Duke of Ravenswood had not disappeared entirely. His severity remained, his commanding presence undiminished. But alongside these qualities had emerged something warmer, something that looked suspiciously like hope. He smiled more frequently now. He laughed. Occasionally, a sound that still surprised me with its rarity and beauty. And he looked at me, across crowded rooms and quiet dinners alike, with an expression that made my heart feel too large for my chest. Isabel became an unexpected ally in those weeks. The woman who had screamed accusations at the Ashworth ball transformed before my eyes into someone quite different, someone capable of dignity and grace, despite the wounds she carried. She moved into a modest but respectable townhouse that Edmund purchased for her, and slowly, painstakingly, began to rebuild the life that had been stolen from her. We took tea together one afternoon, the two women who had loved the same man, and I found myself surprised by how easy the conversation flowed. "I hated you at first," she admitted, her green eyes meeting mine over the rim of her cup. "When I saw you at the ball, when I understood that Edmund had found someone else, I wanted to destroy you both." "I know," I said. "I would have felt the same." She shook her head. "No, you would not have. That is what makes you different from me, Vivian. You do not have hatred in you." When I was at my worst, screaming and accusing and making a spectacle of myself, you looked at me with compassion. "I did not deserve it. Everyone deserves compassion," I replied, "especially those who are suffering." Isabel set down her cup and studied me with an intensity that made me slightly uncomfortable. "He loves you, you know. Edmund. I have known him for many years, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "We have not spoken of the future," I admitted. "There is too much uncertainty. His mother, Lord Fairfax, the opinion of society." "Society will adapt," Isabel said firmly. "It always does." "And as for Edmund's mother," she paused, a shadow crossing her features. "Lady Cordelia is a woman who has built her entire identity around control. When that control is taken from her, she will either adapt or destroy herself. Either way, she is no longer a threat to you." I wished I shared her confidence. Lady Cordelia had been quiet since her removal to the Dower house, but quiet did not mean defeated. I knew, with the certainty born of months of observation, that she was merely waiting, watching, calculating her next move. The opportunity came on a warm May evening, when Edmund received word that Lord Fairfax was planning to flee the country. The evidence Edmund had gathered, combined with the testimonies of several other victims who had finally found the courage to speak, had made Fairfax's position untenable. Rather than face the consequences of his crimes, he had chosen to disappear. "We cannot let him escape," Edmund said, pacing the length of his study with barely contained energy. If he reaches the continent, he may never face justice. What would you have us do? I asked. We cannot simply accost him in the street. No. Edmund's expression hardened. But we can ensure that he does not board his ship. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Fairfax had booked passage on a vessel departing from Southampton, and Edmund arranged for allies to be waiting at every stage of the journey. Constables, magistrates, witnesses prepared to testify. By the time Fairfax's carriage reached the docks, he found not freedom waiting for him, but arrest. I was not present for his capture, but Edmund described it to me later, his voice carrying a grim satisfaction that I understood completely. Fairfax had raged and threatened, had invoked his title and his connections, had promised retribution against everyone involved. But the evidence was overwhelming, and no amount of bluster could change the fact that he would face trial for his crimes. The newspapers treated the scandal with barely restrained glee. A lord brought low, his victims vindicated, his fortune seized to compensate those he had wronged. Isabel's name was cleared publicly, her reputation restored as far as such things could be restored. And Edmund, the Duke of Ravenswood, was praised as a champion of justice, a man who had risked his own position to expose corruption. I read the articles with mixed emotions. Justice had been served, yes. But I knew better than most how complicated the truth really was. Edmund had not acted purely from noble motives. He had been driven by guilt, by the need to atone for his failure to protect Isabel years before, by the desire to finally defeat an enemy who had haunted him for too long. His heroism was real, but it was also human, tangled up with darker impulses that the newspapers would never understand. It was in the quiet aftermath of Fairfax's arrest that Lady Cordelia made her final move. I was in my workroom, putting the finishing touches on a summer gown, when Margaret appeared at the door with an expression that immediately set my nerves on edge. "Miss Ashford," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "the Dowager Duchess has requested an audience with you, at the Dower House." I set aside my needle, my heart beginning to race. She wishes to see me? Alone? She was quite specific about that, yes. Every instinct I possessed screamed that this was a trap. Lady Cordelia had demonstrated her willingness to destroy anyone who threatened her control over her son. Why would she summon me now, when she had seemingly lost everything? But curiosity warred with caution, and in the end, curiosity won. "I will go," I told Margaret. "But if I am not back within 2 hours, send word to His Grace." The Dower House was smaller than Ravenswood House, but still grand by any reasonable standard. An elegant Georgian structure set within its own gardens at the edge of the estate. A servant admitted me and led me to a parlor where Lady Cordelia waited, dressed in the black silk that had become her armor. Miss Ashford. She did not rise as I entered, did not offer any of the courtesies that etiquette demanded. "Please, sit." I lowered myself into a chair across from her, keeping my posture straight and my expression neutral. "You wished to see me, my lady." I did. Her gray eyes, so like Edmund's and yet so different, studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "I have been watching you these past months, watching and thinking. And what conclusions have you reached?" Lady Cordelia's lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "That I underestimated you. When you first arrived at Ravenswood House, I believed you were merely an opportunist, a common girl who had stumbled into fortune and intended to extract whatever advantage she could before being discarded. And now?" "Now," she said slowly, "I believe you are something far more dangerous. You are a woman who loves my son genuinely, who wants nothing from him except his happiness. I have known many people in my life, Miss Ashford, but I have never encountered anyone quite so threatening. I did not know how to respond to this." "Threatening?" I asked finally. "Because I love him? Because you have changed him?" Lady Cordelia's voice carried a weight of grief I had not expected. Edmund was manageable before you arrived. Cold, yes. Distant, but predictable. I knew what motivated him, what controlled him. Now, she spread her hands in a gesture of helplessness. Now he defies me openly. He has dismantled everything I built, exposed secrets I buried years ago, and he has done it all because of you. He did it because it was right, I corrected gently. Because the secrets you buried caused immense suffering to innocent people. Innocent. Lady Cordelia laughed bitterly. There are no innocent people, Miss Ashford, only those who have not yet been tested. Isabel Weston was unsuitable for my son. Her family was riddled with scandal, her fortune non-existent, her temperament unstable. I did what any mother would do to protect her child from a disastrous match. You destroyed her life. I preserved my son's future. Lady Cordelia's eyes blazed with conviction. Do you think I acted from cruelty? I acted from love. The only love I know how to give. I have spent my entire life ensuring that the Thorne name remained untarnished, that Edmund would inherit a legacy worthy of his bloodline. Everything I did for him. I looked at this woman, this formidable creature who had wielded power like a weapon for so long that she had forgotten any other way to live. And I felt, beneath my fear and my anger, something unexpected. Pity. My lady, I said quietly, I believe that you love your son. But love that controls is not truly love. It is fear wearing love's mask. And Edmund does not need your protection. He needs your trust. Lady Cordelia was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. He intends to marry you, does he not? The question struck me like a physical blow. I do not know, I admitted. We have not discussed it. He will. I know my son, even if he no longer wishes to know me. He will marry you, and society will be scandalized, and the Thorne name will become a subject of mockery for a generation. Everything I work to preserve will crumble. Perhaps, I said, or perhaps society will see a man who chose love over convention, and they will admire him for it. Lady Cordelia studied me for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached into the drawer of the table beside her and withdrew a small velvet box. This belonged to my mother, she said, holding it out to me, and her mother before her. It has been passed down through generations of Thorne women, given always from mother to bride on the occasion of her engagement. I did not move to take it. My lady, I cannot accept this. Whatever you may believe about Edmund's intentions, nothing has been decided. Take it. Her voice was weary now, stripped of its customary frost. Consider it a gesture of surrender, if you must. I have fought against you, Miss Ashford, and I have lost. My son has chosen you, and nothing I say or do will change that. The least I can do is acknowledge defeat with what dignity remains to me. I reached out and took the box. Inside, nestled against dark velvet, lay a ring of such delicate beauty that tears pricked at my eyes. A sapphire, deep blue and flawless, surrounded by diamonds that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. It is beautiful, I whispered. It is a burden, Lady Cordelia replied. That ring carries the weight of generations of expectations. Every woman who has worn it has understood that she represents something larger than herself. The question, Miss Ashford, is whether you are prepared to bear that burden. I looked up at her, this woman who had been my enemy since the moment I entered her son's life, and I saw, for the first time, the fear that lurked beneath her cruelty, fear of irrelevance, fear of abandonment, fear that everything she had sacrificed would ultimately mean nothing. I am prepared, I said, to love your son. Whatever burdens come with that love, I will bear them. Something shifted in Lady Cordelia's expression. Not warmth, exactly. She was perhaps incapable of warmth, but acceptance, resignation, the acknowledgement of a battle finally ended. Then perhaps, she said quietly, you are stronger than I gave you credit for. I left the dower house with the ring in my pocket and a strange heaviness in my heart. I had expected confrontation, perhaps even threats. What I had received instead was something far more complicated. The surrender of a woman who had never learned to love without controlling, to protect without destroying. Edmund was waiting for me when I returned to Ravenswood House. He stood in the entrance hall, his gray eyes dark with concern, and the moment he saw me, he crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides. "Margaret told me where you went," he said, taking my hands in his. "I was about to come after you. What happened? What did she say?" Instead of answering, I withdrew the velvet box from my pocket and held it out to him. His face went pale. "Where did you get this?" "Your mother gave it to me." I watched the emotions play across his features, shock and confusion, and something that looked almost like hope. "She said it belonged to your grandmother, and her grandmother before her." Edmund took the box from my hands and opened it, staring down at the ring as if he had never seen it before. "This ring," he said slowly, "has not left my mother's possession in 40 years. She refused to give it even to Isabel when I told her of my intentions. She said it was reserved for a woman worthy of the Thorn name. And now she has given it to me," I said. "I do not fully understand why." Edmund looked up at me, and in his gray eyes I saw the answer to a question I had not dared to ask. "I do," he said. He took the ring from its box and held it up, the sapphire catching the light of the chandelier above us. "Vivian Ashford, I have loved you since the moment I opened my eyes in the rain and saw your face above me. I have loved you through every obstacle, every scandal, every moment of doubt, and I will love you until my last breath, if you will have me." He lowered himself to one knee, there in the entrance hall of Ravenswood House, with servants watching from doorways and the portrait of his ancestors looking down upon us. "Marry me," he said. "Not because society expects it, or because my mother has surrendered, or because it will secure your position. Marry me because you love me as I love you. Because we have found in each other something rare and precious. Because I cannot imagine facing the rest of my life without you beside me." I looked down at him, this proud duke kneeling before a seamstress, offering her everything he had and everything he was. I thought of the rain and the umbrella and the moment when 2 strangers became something more. I thought of all the obstacles we had overcome, all the enemies we had defeated, all the ways we had changed each other for the better. "Yes," I said, and my voice did not waver. "Yes, Edmund, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for me to claim it. Then he rose and pulled me into his arms, and he kissed me with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. The servants applauded. Margaret wept openly, and somewhere in the distance I imagined I could hear the rain falling, washing away the last remnants of the life I had left behind. We were married in the chapel at Ravenswood House on a golden September morning, with autumn just beginning to paint the trees in shades of amber and crimson. The guest list was small by aristocratic standards, limited to those who had proven themselves true friends during the difficult months leading to this day. Isabel attended, radiant in a gown I had made for her, sitting beside a gentleman of modest means and genuine heart whom she had met during her rehabilitation into society. Margaret and her husband sat in the front row, beaming with proprietary pride. Even Lady Cordelia came, though she sat apart from the others, her expression unreadable. When the ceremony concluded and Edmund led me down the aisle as his duchess, she inclined her head to me in what I chose to interpret as acknowledgement. It was not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but it was a beginning. Perhaps in time something more might grow. The reception was held in the gardens, where lanterns hung from every branch and musicians played soft melodies that drifted on the evening breeze. I moved through the crowd in a daze of happiness. accepting congratulations from people who had once looked upon me with disdain, marveling at how completely my world had transformed. Edmund found me standing alone near the rose garden, gazing up at stars that seemed brighter than they had any right to be. "Are you happy?" he asked, slipping his arm around my waist. "I am terrified," I admitted. "I am a duchess now. I have no idea how to be a duchess." He laughed, that rare and beautiful sound I had come to treasure. "You have been navigating society for months, facing down enemies and winning allies. You have changed my mother's mind, befriended the woman who once wished to destroy you, and transformed a cold and bitter man into someone capable of love. I think you will manage the duties of a duchess quite admirably." I leaned into him, drawing comfort from his warmth and his certainty. "I never imagined any of this, you know. When I ran toward your carriage in the rain, I thought only of helping someone in need. I never dreamed it would lead to this. That is precisely why it did." Edmund turned me to face him, his gray eyes soft in the starlight. "You acted without calculation, without expectation of reward. You showed kindness to a stranger because kindness was what he needed. That is rarer than you know, Vivian. Rarer and more precious." I reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines that had softened so much since our first meeting. "I love you," I said. "I love the man you were and the man you have become. I love your severity and your gentleness, your strength and your vulnerability. I love all of you, Edmund Thorne, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." He kissed me then, under the stars, in the garden of the house that was now our home. And I understood finally what my mother had meant when she told me that love could find you in the most unexpected places. I had been a seamstress, a nobody, a woman invisible to the world of wealth and privilege that swirled around her. Now I was a duchess, a wife, a woman who had proven that kindness could conquer cruelty, that hope could survive the darkest circumstances, that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil. The future stretched before us, unknown and full of possibility. There would be challenges ahead. Society would not accept me easily, and there would always be those who whispered behind fans about the common girl who had captured a duke. But I had faced worse than whispers. I had faced Lady Cordelia Thorne and emerged victorious. I had faced the ghosts of Edmund's past and helped him lay them to rest. Whatever came next, I would face it with my husband at my side and the strength I had discovered within myself. I thought of my mother, who had died believing that I would live a small and quiet life. I wished she could have seen me now, standing in the moonlight in a gown of ivory silk, wearing a ring that had belonged to generations of noble women. She would have been proud, I thought, not of the title or the wealth, but of the woman I had become, a woman who had saved a stranger with nothing but an umbrella and a kind heart, a woman who had found love in the most improbable of places, a woman who had proven, once and for all, that the measure of a person was not in the circumstances of their birth, but in the choices they made when fate placed opportunity in their path. I am Vivian Thorne, Duchess of Ravenswood, and this is only the beginning of my story.